Okay, so we want to ensure that the user cannot navigate to the create quote URL without actually being authenticated. So let's create a middleware to do that. So let me just go to my middleware. Okay. And let me just copy and paste since it's a common pattern. Okay, so a middleware will be in front. And so I'm going to call this one require authentication. Okay. And so what our middleware, this middleware will do, okay, let's remove that. It will actually check to see if the user is authenticated. So if not app that is authenticated, okay. So if the user has not been authenticated, meaning returns false, then we're just going to redirect to the login page. Okay, so http.redirect, and we're going to redirect to user/login. Okay, all right. And the key thing to remember now, okay, once the user, oh, sorry, I have to return, all right? So we got to return so that we leave. Otherwise, we'll execute the next, okay, which is not good. Okay, so if the user is not authenticated, we're just going to redirect them to the login page, and then we're going to exit. Now, if the user has been authenticated, then of course we're going to skip this, and we're going to call the next handler or the next serve HTTP that is in line. Okay, but before I do that, this key thing I must do, and this key thing is I must tell the browser not to cache this response. Okay, and if you think about it, if I have authenticated the user, then the response, everything I'm going to do now assumes that the user is authenticated. So all the variables and everything is set because the user is authenticated. So if the browser goes ahead and caches that response, what it means that if, for example, the user logs out and then the user navigates or looks for that page, which is a page that can only be seen if you're authenticated, then because the browser cached it earlier, then the user doesn't have to be authenticated anymore. All right. And so we want to tell the browser, do not cache this response. If the user wants this page again, I want you to go back and run the authentication functionality again to check that the user is actually authenticated. Okay, so I'm sure that, for example, when you have to enter your banking information, all right, that's not saved. Okay, you have to enter it every time, and the reason is very simple. It's sensitive information, and most websites, when you enter sensitive information, they tell the browser, do not cache that sensitive information. Okay, good. Okay, So let's add a header, and I'm gonna say header dot add, and the header is going to be cache control. Okay, and we will say that it's gonna have the no store option. Okay, so again, this header that I'm going to add to my response tells the browser not to cache this page that I am sending. All the information associated with that page, with that response, do not cache it. Okay, if that page is ever required again, then you're going to have to go through the entire process whereby you have to go all the way and ask the server and say, server, this is the page I want. And then the server, of course, will check to see if the user is authenticated, and then, of course, move from there. All right, so no caching. I cannot say that enough. You cannot cache this page, this response. Okay, so once we have done that, then of course we'll call the next serve HTTP that is in line. Okay, and this is our middleware. Okay, so let's use this middleware. We know by now we'll go to the routes. Okay, and so which routes are we going to protect with this middleware? Well, we don't want the user to be able to create quotes. So we want to protect the get and the post. Okay, so we want to protect these two. Okay, so all I'm going to do, I'm going to say dynamic middleware, and then I'm going to append our middleware we just created. So I'm just going to say append. I'm going to add the middleware app dot require authentication like that, and then I'm just going to bring this back. That. Okay. So this is it. Okay. It's a bit long, but dynamic middleware that append. So I'm going to append this middleware, okay, to my dynamic middleware variable. And after I've done that, then of course I'm going to attach it to the create quote form. So the only way we can get to this create quote form is if we run through this middleware. Okay, so if if the user types /quote/create, the first thing that we will do is take that request and send it through the middleware, which will check to see if the user can get to that page. All right, and again, that's the whole point of middleware, in the middle of your handlers. Okay, so again, middleware is very important. Okay, let's do the same for the post. So I'm going to append app dot authentication and that. Okay, and then let's do that for logout, since you shouldn't be able to get to logout unless you've logged in. So append app dot authentication, then bring this over here. Okay, so these are the three URLs, three URL paths that we are protecting with middleware. All right. Okay. So again, middleware, as the name suggests, is sitting in the middle. Okay, it's preventing users, unauthenticated users, from gaining access to these URLs. Okay, so let's see how this works. And again, the browser will not be caching any of our responses. Okay. Again, the reason why is because whenever we want this, if the user types this, every time the user types that, every time the user wants to go there, we want that to come back to our web server, and for our web server to actually validate it, to not validate, but to verify, to check to see if the user is authenticated. All right. So if we don't do that, if we do not specify a no store option, again, if we don't specify no store, then the browser will not send a request back to the server. All right, it will simply say, oh, okay, I already have this cached. I have the response cached. Right, so let me just use it again. Let me just use it. But then, what if the user logged out? If the user logged out, well then, as far as the browser is concerned, the user is still logged in. All right, because we're not authenticating. Okay, so let's back home. Let's see if we can type quote /create. Okay. All right. So notice I've been redirected to the login page. All right, which makes sense. So let's log in. Okay. Okay, so I can make a quote. Okay. Hope, joy, and peace, maybe. All right, I can submit. All right. Go back. All right. Okay. All right. So that brings us to, of course, if I log out, okay. If I try to do create code, again, it takes me back to the login screen. So if I did not tell the browser to not store my responses, then if I had backtracked, I would have been able to see, if I use the back button, I would have been able to see the create quote form. But does it notice? I can't, right? I can't. I can see the login, I can see the home, but I cannot see the create quote form because the browser is not caching that form. Okay, that's what we want. That's what we want. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this unit, which is talking about authorization. So again, the concepts are sort of straightforward. All we want to do is to create a middleware, and in that middleware, we want to check to see if the user is authenticated. And if the user is not authenticated, we want to redirect them to some page, preferably the login page or the sign up page. However, if that user is authenticated, then we want to ensure that the browser is not caching anything. Okay, and so once we tell the browser not to cache our responses, we can then send the request down the middleware line, meaning whoever needs to be called next will be called next. Okay, so that's it. That is user authorization. Okay, I'll see you in the next lesson.